Hello and welcome to another devlog of Jungle Jumper, as I now call it. In the menu it's still displayed as Jungle Gym, but that's going to change when I get to redesigning the menu UI. So the entire feature set of my game is now complete, and it is pretty satisfying to know that the core mechanics of my game are complete and there's nothing new to add gameplay wise. Well, except for one small tiny thing I'll get to at the end of the week. But for now, I want to focus on bugs. Throughout development, I built up a backlog of bugs and inconveniences that I would like to get out of the way before moving on with art and sound. It's not a huge list, but it's very important that they are sorted out, especially things like a user account resetting itself for no apparent reason. So I'll just get started and we'll see what comes of it. A tiny precursor to the video. I added some touch controls to make the game actually playable on mobile devices so I could test it better. For this, I just slapped some buttons on the screen. I also checked to see if the left part of the screen is being pressed to determine if the player should grab onto a rope or not. Now, back to bugs. The first issue I have in my list is that there's an event that triggers twice somewhere, and this causes the spikes to be spawned in 2 times. This doesn't directly affect gameplay, but can be irritating to look at, so I'll just fix this real quick by checking if the spikes have already been spawned in, and just not spawning them if there already is a spike instance in the game. Quick and simple solution. The next bug again is visual, and it involves the Canopy. It's actually Canopy and not Canopy, how I've been saying it previously. I've been made aware of that just recently. Anyway, currently it is possible for the Canopy to generate on screen when the user hits the generate next block trigger. This isn't ideal because of the ugly pop-in, and I try to fix it by moving the trigger a little closer to the start of the tile, but that just makes the previous tile pop out on screen. The solution to this was to simply allow for the previous tile to persist over one more iteration than usual. Then I can safely move the next tile spawn trigger further to the start of a tile, and that fixes the pop in and pop out. There's one issue I had in the main menu background I made in the previous episode, and that is that the ropes kind of freak out when the scene is loaded. It turns out that I used the local position of the ropes instead of the global position to initialize their starting position, so with a quick change, that issue is completely fixed. Next, I had this one issue previously where the Jetpack ability wouldn't trigger when activated, but after testing this a few times, it didn't happen anymore, so I guess some issues resolve themselves, and I'm not going to complain. Next is another visual issue. It's that the spikes take up too much screen space when the player dies. This is simply fixed by changing the camera offset from the player when the player dies. Alright, last 2 issues now. Rope texture tiling has been wrong in the past, with the rope tiling from the bottom when the player moves up or down along the rope. The fix to this was to reverse the rope segment array and therefore reversing the line renderer to make the rope tile from the correct end. And finally, I had an issue with the bounce pad, occasionally slamming the player into the ceiling when used. This came with a chance of the player missing any rope and therefore dying. Of course, I can't have this happen, so to fix it, I performed a raycast when the player hits the bounce pad in the direction of the bounce. Depending on how far away the target spot is, that's how much force I apply to the player to ensure they land just shy of the ceiling. This doesn't work flawlessly, especially when the canopy is sloping downward, but it works well enough to prevent the player from missing any ropes, which was the goal anyway. And that was it for the bugs. Oh, there was one more bug with the user account resetting for some reason. And I still have to figure out if it had to do with Unity crashing occasionally or if it's something I missed in the code. But I wasn't able to reproduce it again so far, so I'll have to look into it later. Now there's one last feature I want to implement to finally finish the chapter of feature implementation and move on to art and sound. That is, I want to add a simple indicator for how far the player is away from their high score location. To do this, I calculate the angle that a game object should be pointing to face the exact position of the player's high score, and set this arrow sprite here to point at it at all times. Then I have this tomb sprite indicating what the arrow is pointing at, and finally, once the player beats their current high score, I play this particle effect and remove the indicator entirely. Of course, it's still quite ugly, but that will be fixed in the next chapter, when I add artwork and polish to the game and menu. Well, for now that was it from me. I hope you enjoyed this slightly less entertaining devlog despite mostly nothing new happening. Subscribe to keep up to date with my content, like the video, and I'll see you next time.